Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into the wild west of 1870 where morning does not arrive with a click, a glowing screen, or the lazy buzz of some kitchen machine that judges your breakfast choices. Instead, the day comes creeping over the prairie in strips of grey and pearl, touching rough-board walls, stiff blankets, and the cold tip of your nose. You wake because the world itself wakes. A rooster complains somewhere outside. A horse stamps in the dirt. Wind slides through a crack in the timber and brushes your cheek like an uninvited relative. What does life feel like when darkness is truly dark? When warmth must be built by hand, and when every comfort begins as labour? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you are here, leave a comment with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights. You open your eyes to a room that has never known electric light. The first thing you notice is temperature. It sits in the air like a fact. During the night, the little heat left in the stove died down hours ago, and the cabin has turned sharp with cold. Your blanket feels coarse against your fingertips. The straw mattress under you gives off a faint dry smell, part grass and part dust. Somewhere in the half-dark, a bed frame creaks as another sleeper shifts and coughs. Morning begins early because it has to. In 1870, daylight is not just helpful. It is your schedule, your clock, and your employer. You cannot press a switch and borrow a few more cheerful hours from the evening. When the sky brightens, your body understands the bargain. Get up now or lose precious time. You sit up and pull on clothes that are never quite soft enough. Wool scratches your skin. Linen feels cool at first, then clammy. Your boots wait beside the bed, stiff from yesterday's mud and dust. They are heavy things, practical and honest, with none of the modern promise that shoes should somehow love your feet. You lace them anyway. The boards underfoot are icy. They remind you immediately that comfort is not the default setting here. The cabin is simple. A table, a few chairs, pegs on the wall, a washstand, perhaps a shelf holding tin cups and a Bible, maybe a family keepsake wrapped carefully in cloth. In wealthier homes, you might find a clock, framed prints, or a chest with decent hinges. In poorer ones, every object works for its place. That is the quiet law of the frontier. Anything that does not serve some use has to explain itself. A faint bluish light leaks through the window. Glass itself is a bit of a luxury in many Western settlements. Some cabins still use oiled paper or small panes patched together in awkward shapes. Historians still argue whether frontier families were usually as isolated and ragged as later stories claimed, because some communities had steady trade goods while others lived far more roughly. The Wild West was never one single place with one single standard. It was a patchwork of mining camps, ranches, farmsteads, army posts, railroad towns, and settlements trying very hard to look permanent. You cross to the wash basin. The water in the pitcher is bitterly cold. It may have been brought in last night from a pump, creek, barrel, or well, and by dawn it has the personality of a threat. You splash your face anyway. The shock wakes you fully. It prickles your skin and runs down your neck. Soap, if you use any now, smells faintly of lye and animal fat. It cleans well enough. It also feels like it might remove a layer of your opinions. There is no hum in the room, no vent breathes warm air, no refrigerator ticks in the corner, no bathroom fan mutters overhead. Silence is never complete, but it is natural silence, made of wood settling, fabric brushing, distant livestock, and the soft hiss of morning wind. People in this world know sounds differently. They can tell from a horse's snort whether an animal is restless. They notice wagon wheels long before the vehicle appears. They hear weather arriving. Your next thought is fire. If yesterday's coals survived in the stove or hearth, the morning has granted you a small mercy. You kneel near the ashes and stir them carefully. A dull orange glow may still hide beneath the grey. You feed it slivers of kindling, dry chips, a twist of paper if any can be spared. Then you crouch close and blow. Smoke curls up, smelling sharp and woody, catching in your throat. Your eyes sting. It is not elegant. It is not fast. But slowly the flame wakes, licks upward, and takes hold. In homes across the American West, this little ritual shapes the day. Without it, breakfast stalls, hands stay numb and tempers sour before sunrise. Fire is both servant and tyrant. It cooks, warms, dries clothes, heats water, and gives light. It also burns cabins, barns, hotels, entire blocks of wooden towns. A single-tipped lamp, a dirty stovepipe, or a chimney spark can turn a settlement into an accidental bonfire. Frontier newspapers carried many stories of destructive fires, especially in newer boomtowns where buildings stood close and were built quickly. You live with that knowledge the way people now live with passwords and smoke alarms. It is simply part of being alive. Soon the room begins to smell of burning pine or cottonwood. Heat pushes outward in little waves. Your fingers thaw. Someone sets a kettle near the flame. Someone else reaches for a skillet. Breakfast is not glamorous, but it is fuel. Salt pork, biscuits, cornmeal mush, beans, coffee if you're lucky, maybe molasses, maybe eggs if chickens are doing their patriotic duty. The smell is rich, smoky, and heavy. Grease pops in the pan. Tin cups clink on the table. Coffee matters enormously, and not only because mornings are cruel. By 1870, coffee had become a staple in many parts of the United States, including the frontier, where it was treasured for warmth, alertness, and morale. Cowboys, soldiers, miners, and homesteaders all leaned on it. There is also a wonderfully odd little tidbit from frontier life. Some people stretched coffee supplies by reusing grounds again and again, boiling them until the drink must have resembled a dark personal insult. Waste was a luxury. Taste could fend for itself. You eat while the sun climbs. Light enters slowly, not all at once. It lays a pale stripe across the table, then catches the rim of a cup, then the edge of a knife, then finally the whole room opens into view. This is what living without electricity teaches every single day. Light is an event. It has stages. It arrives with drama, though nobody on the frontier has time to stand around applauding it. Outside, the morning is bigger than the house. The air holds the scent of cold dirt, trampled grass, wood smoke, and animal manure. It is not the fragrance section of a department store, yet it feels alive, direct, and entirely honest. You step into a yard of packed earth, maybe edged by split rails, maybe cluttered with tools, buckets, a chopping block, and a wagon wheel waiting for repair. Horses flick their tails, chickens scratch and mutter. A dog circles hopefully, carrying the expression of a creature who believes all breakfasts contain legal loopholes. Your first hours are full of effort. That is another truth of life without electricity. Labour begins the moment you rise. Water must be carried, wood must be chopped, feed must be measured, ashes must be cleaned out. Floors get swept with a broom that raises as much dust as it captures. Clothes may need mending. Bread may need mixing. Harness leather may need oiling. Nothing runs invisibly in the background. Every necessity stands in front of you and asks, quite plainly, well then, are you doing this or not? For women on the frontier especially, the work could be relentless. Cooking, washing, childcare, sewing, preserving food, hauling water, tending gardens, and helping with livestock often filled every waking hour. Men faced punishing labour too in fields, ranches, transport, mining, and construction. The popular legend of the Wild West often focuses on gunfighters, saloons, and dramatic standoffs, but most people spent more time dealing with laundry than with outlaws. Not as glamorous, perhaps much more accurate. The sun itself becomes your household technology. You use it to see dirt on a shirt, to judge weather, to know how quickly breakfast must end, and to decide whether there is time to ride to town and return before dusk. In a world without electrical lighting, morning and afternoon carry real urgency. Delay has consequences. If you put off a chore, darkness may cancel it altogether. A frontier child learns this quickly. Even children have tasks. They fetch kindling, gather eggs, scare animals from gardens, watch younger siblings, and run messages. Many begin useful work astonishingly young by modern standards. That does not always mean a joyless life. Children still play, invent games, climb things they were definitely told not to climb, and chase one another through dust and weeds. But childhood here has edges. It is shaped by usefulness. You look out across the land and understand another strange feature of this unelectrified life. Distance appears larger. Without electric lines, paved roads, radios, or glowing town grids at night, the landscape feels less tamed. The horizon is not decoration. It is a fact you must respect. A neighbour a few miles away may be close by frontier standards. A town 10 or 15 miles off may take real planning. News travels by rider, wagon, train, telegraph in some places, and plain gossip everywhere. But telegraph lines, where they exist, do not mean ordinary homes are electrically transformed. They simply mean the age of rapid communication has arrived before the age of convenient living room comfort. Civilization, very typically, has chosen its priorities in a funny order. By now, the sun is well above the horizon. The chill softens, though not always by much. The cabin behind you looks humble in the growing light, its boards rough, its chimney already sighing a thread of smoke into the morning air. You feel the day stretching ahead in tasks measured by muscle, patience, and weather. No switch will shorten them. No machine will quietly absorb them. This is the first deep truth of living without electricity in the Wild West in 1870. Survival is not abstract. It is physical, hourly, intimate. You know the texture of your own life through your hands. Splinters, calluses, cracked skin, the warmth of a tin cup, the roughness of rope, the smooth worn handle of a useful tool. You know the smell of your world as surely as its geography: smoke in your hair, coffee on your breath, damp wool, sun-struck dust, horse sweat, frying grease and soap and cold iron. You know its sounds without effort: wind at the eaves, bucket chains, lowing cattle, boots on boards, pots knocking together, and voices carrying farther in clean, dry air than you would expect. And because there is no electric glare flattening everything at once, the morning remains gentle for longer. Shadows hold their shape, corners stay dim. The day eases open. It does not burst into brightness. For all the hardship, there is something almost ceremonial in that. You rise with the sun because the sun still matters completely. It tells you when to wake, when to hurry, when to stop, and when to accept that the world has gone dark enough for work to end. That is how the day begins in the Wild West of 1870. Not with convenience, not with speed, but with breath fogging in cold air, with flame coaxed back from ash, and with the steady knowledge that every ordinary comfort must first be made with your own two hands. The centre of your home is not a sofa, a table, or even the bed. It is fire. Fire decides whether breakfast happens, whether socks dry, whether coffee tastes vaguely hopeful, and whether your fingers can still bend by sunrise. In 1870, living without electricity in the Wild West means you do not simply use heat. You manage it, court it, feed it, and fear it a little. Like many important relationships, it is useful, expensive, and capable of ruining your life. By the time the day is properly underway, the hearth or stove has become busy with duties. A cast iron stove, if you have one, is a treasured object. It is sturdy, practical, and almost noble in its ability to turn fuel into comfort. In many frontier homes, though, people still rely on an open hearth or a far simpler arrangement. The difference matters. A good stove wastes less heat, burns more efficiently, and lets you cook with some control. An open fire gives you warmth and smoke in nearly equal proportions, which is a very frontier kind of compromise. You kneel by the firebox and add another split log. The bark feels rough and flaky under your palm. Dust and dry wood crumbs cling to your skin. When the new piece catches, the smell changes at once. It deepens into something resinous and warm, a scent that settles into curtains, clothes, hair, blankets, and even bread. A frontier house smells like the fuel that keeps it alive. Pine has one voice, oak has another. Cottonwood burns faster and less nobly, almost as if it knows it is not the favourite. Wood does not appear by magic. This is one of the great disappointing themes of frontier life. Every useful thing comes with chores attached. Logs have to be cut, split, stacked, carried, and protected from damp. In regions with fewer trees, fuel could be an even greater problem. Some families burned buffalo chips on the plains, especially where timber was scarce. Yes, dried bison dung. It burned surprisingly well, which is one of those details that makes the past feel both inventive and faintly rude. The fire did not care about elegance, it cared about fuel. A pile of wood beside the stove is more than a convenience. It is stored time. Each split stick means labour already spent and labour not yet needed. You notice how carefully frontier households watch those piles in winter. A shrinking wood stack has a way of making people quiet. It is a visible countdown. No thermostat will rescue you. No company truck will arrive. You either prepared enough, or you begin bargaining with cold. Cooking itself asks for patience and judgment. With no electric oven, no timer, and no reliable temperature dial, you learn by eye, ear, and instinct. You listen for the sizzle in a pan. You watch how quickly a biscuit browns. You move pots closer to heat or farther away. You lift lids and get a faceful of steam smelling of beans, onions, broth, or boiled cornmeal. A careless hand gets burned. A distracted cook gets lunch charred black at the bottom. The frontier kitchen can produce excellent meals, but it does not tolerate dreamy incompetence for long. The tools are sturdy and simple. Cast iron pots, skillets, Dutch ovens, long spoons, tin plates, knives that need sharpening more often than anyone prefers. The texture of daily food depends on what the land, season, money, and luck provide. Beans are common, bread is constant, salt pork appears with depressing reliability. Fresh fruit may be rare in some places. In others, gardens and orchards make a better showing than the legend suggests. Historians still debate how grim ordinary frontier diets truly were, because conditions varied hugely by region, income, and access to trade. Some households ate with decent variety, others lived in a long practical tunnel of starch, grease, and endurance. Still, warmth from cooking changes the room. Steam rises and softens the air. Grease crackles. A pot lid rattles faintly. Someone wipes flour from their hands onto an apron already carrying the history of many meals. Someone tastes a broth with a wooden spoon and nods, or does not nod, which says everything. In winter, the stove makes the kitchen the social heart of the house. People gather there not from romance but from common sense. Heat is where heat is. Laundry brings another use for fire, and it is less cosy than people in embroidered nostalgia might imagine. Washing clothes in 1870 is hard, damp, repetitive work. Water must be heated in kettles. Soap must be worked through thick fabric by hand. Stains are attacked with rubbing, soaking, boiling, and determination. Then garments are wrung out with aching wrists and hung to dry, often stiffening in cold air or filling rooms with a wet wool smell that could humble even the proudest household. Heat helps, but it does not solve anything neatly. It simply makes the misery warmer. You begin to understand something important. Fire does not remove labour. It redirects labour into 1,000 small rituals. Kindling first, ashes out, damper checked, pot moved, chimney watched, water heated, coals saved. Every action asks for timing. This is one reason household skill mattered so deeply. Running a home without electricity was not passive. It required memory, observation, and stamina. A competent homemaker on the frontier was managing energy long before anyone used such polished modern phrases. Children are often warned away from the stove, though they are also expected to help around it. Such is the lovely logic of the 19th century. Stand back, but also carry this kettle. Do not touch that lid, but mind the bread. A boy might be sent for more wood. A girl might be taught when biscuits are ready by colour alone. Of course, real life is messier than tidy old ideals. Roles varied. Emergencies ignored etiquette. Need often outranked custom. If work had to be done, somebody did it. In better-built homes and town hotels, you may find specialised stoves for cooking or heating, and these can seem almost miraculous in efficiency. They are still dirty by modern standards, still demanding, still fed by solid fuel, but they represent real progress. The 19th century loved improvement, and stove design was one place where invention truly mattered. Advertisements praised fuel savings, easier cooking, and safer operation. Whether every stove lived up to those claims is another matter. Advertising optimism is not a new disease. Then there is the matter of light. Fire serves here too, though not kindly. As afternoon leans toward evening, flames and embers begin preparing for their nighttime duties. Candles and kerosene lamps will help later, but the stove and hearth still contribute glow, warmth, and the suggestion that human beings remain in partial control of the dark. That control is limited. An open hearth throws dancing light that flatters no wallpaper and invents strange angles on every face. A stove glows through seams and vents like some iron animal breathing through its ribs. The smell of soot is constant in many homes. Chimneys do not always draw perfectly. Smoke may drift back into the room on a bad day, stinging eyes and catching in the throat. Curtains darken, ceilings stain. Fingertips find black dust on mantles, kettles, and brickwork. Your nose learns to ignore much of it, just as frontier people learned to ignore countless discomforts that would launch modern complaints before breakfast. Not because they were superhuman, but because daily life gave them little choice. And yet fire brings a kind of beauty too. That is the irritating thing about it. After making you chop wood, scorch bread, and smell like an old chimney, it suddenly turns around and fills the room with amber light so lovely you forgive it. Flames curl blue and gold around a log. Red coals pulse softly beneath ash. A kettle hums. Outside, wind presses at the walls. Inside, the warmth sits against your legs and hands like a quiet promise. No electric bulb truly looks like this. Steadier. Yes, cleaner. Certainly, but not like this. In frontier towns, the broader community also depends on fire in ways city people later forget. Blacksmiths need forges, bakers need ovens, hotels need hot kitchens, saloons need stoves, lamps, and fireplaces to keep customers from fleeing to their blankets. Bathwater in boarding houses must be heated, if bathwater exists at all, which is not always guaranteed. A barber may warm towels, a doctor boils instruments and water. Heat stands behind nearly every trade. This dependence makes fire danger a shared civic anxiety. Many Western towns in the 1860s and 1870s were built quickly from wood, canvas, and optimism. Those materials are not famous for restraint. One blaze in a business district could leap from building to building with astonishing speed. Volunteer fire companies existed in many towns, but equipment was limited, water supply uncertain, and panic very human. Bells, shouting, bucket brigades, and frantic scrambling formed the emergency system. You can imagine how effective that felt at 2 a.m. with the wind up. Not ideal. A quirky bit of frontier reality is how often people heated objects directly for comfort. Bricks or stones might be warmed near the fire and wrapped for bed. Flat irons were heated on stoves before pressing clothes. Even a simple mug of hot liquid became part of bodily survival. Warmth was portable only if you made it portable. The modern habit of walking room to room in stable indoor temperatures would seem wonderfully extravagant to many people here. They lived in thermal geography. The warm spot mattered. The drafty corner mattered. The space beside the stove was practically real estate. Food preservation also depends partly on controlling heat and its opposite. Without electric refrigeration, people use salting, smoking, drying, pickling, cellaring, and quick consumption. A fire helps smoke meat. A stove helps boil, preserves. A cool cellar protects what heat would spoil. Every season changes the rules. Summer can turn kitchens into punishment chambers, with heavy air, flies, and the smell of hot grease refusing to leave. Winter makes cooking more welcome but increases fuel demands. Either way, there is no neutral season where nature simply agrees to cooperate. What strikes you most is the mental burden. Someone in the household is always tracking the state of the fire. Is there enough wood? Are the coals safe? Has the kettle boiled dry? Is supper late because the draught is poor? Did sparks catch near the hearth? Has the chimney been cleaned? This background attention never really stops. It is as constant as a modern people checking battery percentages, except far more important, because the penalty for neglect can be hunger, cold, or catastrophe. By late day, ashes gather thick and pale in the stove belly or hearthbed. You sweep, shovel, and tidy. Ash itself can still be useful. Mixed and managed properly, wood ash had household applications, including soap making when combined with fat through a longer process involving lye. Frontier life was full of these cycles. Waste from one task drifted into another. Nothing was casually discarded if it could become useful again. Practicality was the reigning philosophy, and it wore no fancy hat. When evening deepens, the fire takes on a final role. It becomes company. Its crackle fills pauses in conversation. Its glow softens plain walls and tired faces. It makes a simple room feel inhabited in a fuller way. You stretch out cold hands and feel heat enter the stiff joints of your fingers. Your clothes hold the scent of wood smoke. Your skin carries a faint dusty warmth. The room around you is still humble, still labour-made, still vulnerable to winter, accident, and scarcity. But the flame at its centre says you are sheltered for now. That small phrase matters deeply, for now. In the Wild West of 1870, living without electricity means comfort is never detached from effort. Warmth has weight. Light burns fuel. Hot food begins in labour. The hearth is not decoration. It is the beating centre of domestic life, glowing, smoking, sin, demanding, and indispensable. You feed it because it feeds you back. Perhaps not kindly, but faithfully enough. By the time the sun climbs higher, the day has already made its demands plain. Without electricity in the Wild West of 1870, work is not arranged around convenience. It is arranged around light. Daylight tells you when to begin, when to hurry, and when to stop pretending there is still plenty of time. The sun is your foreman, your bookkeeper, and your mildly judgmental life coach. You step outside and feel the day settling into its true shape. The air may be cool still or already warming fast, depending on season and country. Out on the plains, the light seems huge, almost too clean. In a mountain settlement, it falls across slopes and rough roofs in sharp bands. In a dusty town, it bounces off wagon ruts, stable yards, and pale walls until everything looks dry enough to crumble. However it appears, it matters because nearly every task now depends on seeing clearly. There are no electric bulbs in barns, sheds, workshops, kitchens, or stores to rescue a late start. If you want a chore done well, you do it while the light holds. This simple fact shapes the mood of the whole day. People move with more urgency in the morning than many modern listeners would find polite. Breakfast is finished. Tools are gathered. Animals are checked. Doors swing open. Boots strike porches and packed dirt. The settlement seems to wake not in a slow yawn, but in a determined shrug. For farmers and homesteaders, the daylight hours vanish almost before they begin. Fences need mending, fields need turning, planting, hoeing, or harvesting, depending on the time of year. Livestock need feed, water, and watching. A loose gate can become an all-day problem. A broken wagon wheel can rewrite every plan. A sudden cloud burst can turn a dusty track into heavy mud that clings to boots and wagon rims with malicious affection. People often imagine frontier life as grand and open, full of dramatic horizons. It is also full of very ordinary practical setbacks, many of them involving dirt. If you live near town rather than on an isolated claim, the pattern changes but the rule stays the same. Shopkeepers open early to catch customers while the streets are active. Blacksmiths begin as soon as they can see their work well enough. The ring of hammer on iron carries crisply through the air, mixed with horse snorts, wagon creaks, and the low ongoing murmur of human business. Carpenters, wheelwrights, and teamsters all depend on the hours between sunrise and dusk. In businesses that use lamps indoors during the day, the extra expense is not trivial. Kerosene costs money, candles cost money, windows are free, which makes them extremely fashionable. You notice the practical architecture of this world. Shops and homes chase daylight wherever they can. Windows matter. Open doors matter. Workbenches are placed near the best light. Curtains are modest or absent. because nobody is going to waste the sun on decoration. Even a good tailor or seamstress must think about where the brightest patch falls across fabric. Fine stitching in weak light strains the eyes and invites mistakes. There is a reason people of the 19th century often had poor vision as they aged, and long years of close work by dim or uneven light did not help. Travel also bows to the sun. If you need to ride into town, carry a message, visit a neighbour, move cattle or haul supplies, you begin with daylight calculations. How far is the trip? What is the road like? Will the creek be passable? Are there enough hours to return safely? Darkness out here is not simply the cute time when restaurants turn on string lights and everyone starts discussing dessert. Night can mean ruts hidden in the road, stray animals, weather, wrong turns, and the unpleasant realization that every distant shape may or may not be what you hoped it was. Stagecoach lines and freight wagons certainly travel beyond daylight when necessary, and ranch work could stretch long in busy seasons. But ordinary people generally preferred not to test the limits of night travel unless required. Historians still disagree on just how dangerous the roads were in different western regions, because popular legend mixed real hazards with a great deal of theatrical exaggeration. Some routes were genuinely risky from weather, terrain, or crime. Others were merely uncomfortable and inconvenient, which in the 19th century was already enough to discourage enthusiasm. Mid-morning is a good time to notice the texture of work itself. Nothing hums quietly in the background. There are no electric motors to save small bursts of effort across the day. Water may need drawing by hand, grain may need grinding or hauling. Nails are driven one by one, boards are cut with muscle, butter is churned, clothes are scrubbed, flour dust rises in thin pale clouds, sweat forms under hats and collars. The sun presses on shoulders and necks, hands become gritty from rope, soil, leather, wood shaving, or feed. The soundscape is striking. Instead of compressors, engines, and appliance beeps, you hear repetitive human rhythms, the chop of an axe, the scrape of a shovel, the swish of a broom over rough boards, the creak of harness leather, the clatter of buckets, hooves drumming over hard ground. Human voices carry farther than you expect, especially in clear, dry air. A person calling from across a yard or street sounds oddly distinct. The whole day seems made of separate noises rather than one continuous electric blur. Meals must be fitted into the same daylight economy. Dinner, meaning the larger midday meal in many households, often arrives when there is a pause in field or shop labour. Workers come in dusty, hungry, and already thinking about the next task. Food has to be substantial because the body is burning through it at a ridiculous rate. Bread, beans, potatoes, pork, preserved fruit. Whatever is available and practical. In harvest seasons or on large ranches, feeding everyone well is a serious operation. A frontier appetite is not a poetic concept. It is a structural requirement. One slightly odd detail from the Western life is how often shade itself becomes a valuable resource. We think of light as the precious thing in a world without electricity, and it is. But by midday in summer, too much sun can become its own problem. Work slows, horses tire, faces burn. The patch of shade beside a barn, under a wagon, or along the north side of a building can feel like a kind of temporary salvation. A hat brim becomes important enough to inspire gratitude. Even a cottonwood tree, dusty and half battered by the wind, may suddenly seem like a local hero. School, where communities could manage one, also followed the discipline of light and season. Rural children might attend irregularly, especially when labour at home took priority. A one-room schoolhouse used natural light as much as possible, with desks turned toward windows and lessons shaped by weather, distance, and the practical need for children to be useful elsewhere. Education on the frontier was valued by many families, but ideals often had to negotiate with chores. Chores were very persuasive negotiators. You begin to see that time itself feels different here. Today, people often think of time as chopped into precise blocks, measured by clocks, notifications, and schedules that arrive from outside. In 1870, clocks certainly exist, watches too for those who can afford them, and railroad time is beginning to matter more in some regions. But daily life still leans heavily on the visible progress of the sun. Morning is not just a number. It is a quality of light, a temperature, a smell in the air, a sense of what can still be finished. That gives the day an almost physical momentum. Once the sun tips westward, people feel it. There is a mild tightening in the mind. Tasks not yet done become more urgent. Animals must be brought in or checked. Water must be fetched. Supplies must be stacked under cover. Repairs cannot be delayed much longer. You cannot simply decide to continue after supper under bright overhead lights. Well, you can decide it, but the lamps will be dim, the work slower, and the expense irritating. Daylight is for serious labour. Artificial light is for necessities and a few quieter tasks. This is especially true for jobs requiring precision. A doctor, a seamstress, a bookkeeper, a printer, or a gunsmith all benefit enormously from strong light. In poor light, mistakes multiply, eyes tire, shoulders tense, patience thins. One reason towns mattered so much was that they concentrated labour, trade, and skill during the bright part of the day, allowing people to accomplish more through proximity. If you could walk from livery stable to general store to blacksmith within a short stretch of daylight, you saved time that an isolated homesteader would spend riding miles under the sun. Weather can rewrite everything in a matter of hours. On the frontier, you do not control conditions enough to keep your schedule intact. A hot wind can drive fields too fast. A storm can trap travellers. Heavy snow can reduce a day to survival work only. Spring mud can turn roads into sticky punishment. Dust storms on the plains could darken the day itself, filling mouths, ears, clothing, and houses with grit so fine it seems to pass through solid matter by personal spite alone. Scholars still argue over how much later memory and literature exaggerated these hardships, but no one disputes that weather held far more power over ordinary planning than it does for most people now. Labour patterns also differ between communities. In mining towns, work may begin before full daylight, with men heading underground where the sun matters less once the shift begins. Yet, even there, surface life still depends on daylight for transport, trade, domestic work, and safety. On ranches, seasons of branding, roundup, haying, and carving create different kinds of pressure. In military posts, bugles and routine impose order, but candles and lamps still limit what can be done comfortably after dark. The West is not one place. It is many worlds sharing the same dependence on natural light. You pass someone repairing tack outside a doorway, turning the leather to catch the sun just right. Nearby, a woman shakes rugs over a fence line and sends a pale cloud of dust into the air. A child runs with a pail, then slows because the pail is apparently much heavier now that an adult is watching. A dog sleeps in a patch of shade with the deep moral seriousness of a creature who has never paid taxes. Life is busy, but not abstract. Every action is visible. Work leaves marks on the day. Afternoon begins to mellow the light, colours warm. Long grass shifts softly in the wind. The town street, if there is one, grows more crowded for a while as errands narrow toward completion. Teamsters want to get unloaded before dark. Customers make final purchases. Somebody hurries because they forgot lamp oil, flour, nails, or coffee, which are exactly the sort of omissions that ruin an evening. You can almost feel the settlement drawing itself inward, preparing for the hour when the sun will drop and everything not finished must wait. There is no promise of endless extension here. That may be the clearest difference. In a modern world, unfinished work often lingers under artificial light, late emails, glowing screens, and the heroic delusion that tomorrow's energy can be borrowed tonight. On the frontier, the boundaries are firmer, light fades, eyes strain, roads darken, lamps cost money, wood burns down. At some point, the day closes its ledger whether you approve or not, and perhaps that is why people read the sky so attentively. They watch the angle of the sun on a fence rail, the colour over distant hills, the length of shadows under wagons and horses. They know by sight what modern people learn from a weather app or a digital clock. When to head home, when to finish feeding stock, when to stop chopping, when to put away tools, when to wash up at the basin and accept what the day managed to yield. Living without electricity in the Wild West in 1870 means the sun is never background scenery. It is the great organizer of effort. It grants the hours in which trade, travel, labour, and ordinary competence can happen at full strength. Then, very calmly and without apology, it takes those hours back. You learn to work while the world is bright, because brightness itself is one of the most useful resources you possess. Evening does not arrive gently when you live without electricity. It advances across the land like a patient occupation. The bright edges of things soften first. Then colours lose confidence. Then the world begins withdrawing details one by one, until a fence post, a coat on a peg, and a waiting stranger might all look briefly similar, which is not ideal for your peace of mind. In the Wild West of 1870 night is not something you casually overcome. You negotiate with it using kerosene, candles, memory, and a fair amount of caution. As the sun sinks, one household task becomes newly important. Light must be made ready. You do not just assume that brightness will appear when needed. Someone checks the lamp. Someone trims a wick. Someone wipes soot from a glass chimney with the corner of an apron or a rag kept for that purpose. Someone counts candles and decides whether tonight really deserves the use of a fresh one. Illumination is a resource, and like every resource on the frontier, it requires little acts of management that modern people rarely have to notice. A kerosene lamp, if your household has one, feels almost luxurious compared with candles alone. By 1870, kerosene lighting had become increasingly common in many parts of the United States, including Western settlements that could get supplies through trade routes and rail connections. It is brighter than many candles, steadier in a useful lamp, and practical enough to become a central feature of evening life. Yet nobody would mistake it for daylight. The glow is limited. It creates a circle rather than a room. Beyond that circle, shadows gather with obvious intentions. You lift the lamp and feel its weight in your hand. The metal base is cool. The glass chimney, once lit for a while, will become hot enough to remind careless fingers of their mortality. The smell of kerosene is unmistakable, oily and sharp, with a faint edge that settles in the nose. If the wick is too high, the flame smokes and blackens the chimney. If it is too low, the light turns weak and stingy. Much of frontier life involves finding the exact middle ground between waste and discomfort. Lamps are no exception. When the flame catches and steadies, the room changes at once. Light pools across the table. Tin cups gleam. Faces emerge from a dusk. The grain in the wooden walls grows visible again. The cabin or room does not become bright in any modern sense, but it becomes inhabitable in a different way. Darkness no longer owns every corner. It only owns most of them. Candles serve where lamps are too costly, too few, or too precious to burn freely. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, can smell faintly greasy when burning, while better candles made from beeswax are cleaner and more pleasant, but also more expensive. A candle flame is small, wavering, and surprisingly dramatic. It throws long shadows that lean and jump whenever someone passes by. It can make an ordinary spoon on a table look like part of a conspiracy. A room lit by candles never lets you forget that darkness is nearby, waiting for one careless draught. You begin to understand why evenings indoors were shaped by this weak and localized light. Tasks change. Fine sewing becomes difficult unless you sit very close to the lamp. Reading is possible for some, especially if the print is large and the eyes are young or stubborn, but it strains the face and shoulders. Writing letters takes patience. Mending continues because clothes do not repair themselves out of courtesy. But every stitch asks more attention than it would in daylight. The little domestic arts of night are quiet, close, and careful. The sounds of evening sharpen because light no longer dominates your senses. You hear the tiny hiss of the lamp flame, the faint crackle from the stove or hearth, the soft scrape of a chair leg over board flooring, a spoon against a bowl, a needle pulled through cloth, the rustle of skirts, sleeves, or wool blankets. Outside. A horse shifts weight in the yard. Somewhere farther off, a dog barks once, then again, as if reconsidering the issue. Human ears become companions to the lamp, helping the eyes make sense of what the darkness hides. There is also a physical closeness to evening light that modern people rarely feel. You sit near it, you lean toward it. If you move away, your hands fade from view. Objects become suggestions. People choose places in relation to flame the way flowers choose sunlight, though with more boots and fewer petals. A family at night tends to gather in one lit room, not because they are staging a sentimental painting, but because scattering into separate dark spaces would be awkward, chilly, and rather silly. This concentration shapes social life. Evening conversation happens around the table, near the stove, beside the lamp. Stories are told, clothes are mended, corn may be shelled, accounts may be checked, a Bible may be read aloud, cards might appear. In some homes, music enters the room through a fiddle, a harmonica, or a human voice singing softly. None of this requires electricity. It does require enough fuel, enough patience, and enough wakefulness left after a day of labour. Frontier evenings are often quieter than modern ones, but not necessarily dull. They are simply narrower in scale. One curious detail about lamps and candles is how much routine care they demanded. Chimneys soot up and need cleaning. Wicks char and must be trimmed. Candles drip wax onto surfaces and fingers. Lamp oil has to be bought, stored, and poured without waste. A knocked lamp can start a fire. A dropped candle can ruin cloth or worse. Historians still argue over how much the average household worried about such hazards every single night. But the danger was real enough that it lived in the back of the mind. Fire did not stop being dangerous just because it had put on a little glass hat. If you visit a town after dark, the pattern becomes even more interesting. Streets are not brightly lit in the modern sense. Some larger or wealthier towns may have a few lamps in public areas, hotel entrances, or business fronts, but many streets remain unevenly lit or nearly dark. Light spills from saloon doors, hotel windows, boarding houses, and stores still open for a little while. That creates islands of brightness floating in long stretches of gloom. A person walking at night moves from one patch of visibility to another, with darkness in between like a quiet river. This darkness changes behaviour. People step more carefully. They know where ruts lie in the road and where mud collects. They carry lanterns if they can. A hand lantern with glass sides and a small protected flame is useful for moving through barns, yards, alleys, and streets. Though it lights only a modest area and swings with every stride, the circle of yellow around your boots feels reassuring, but it also makes everything beyond it seem even blacker. That is the rude mathematics of old lighting. The more local the glow, the deeper the dark around it appears. Businesses also live by these limits. Shops close earlier than modern customers might appreciate. Not always because the owner wants rest, though that is certainly part of the appeal, but because keeping the place lit costs money and effort. A general store under lamplight is workable, but no one is eager to inspect small goods for hours after dusk. Saloons, of course, make a stronger attempt to defy the night. They burn lamps, welcome noise, and turn evening into trade. Their interiors smell of tobacco smoke, spilled drink, lamp oil, leather, and damp coats, all warmed together into a kind of frontier perfume that nobody would bottle on purpose. Inside a modest home, supper ends and the room settles. Dishes are washed in basin or pan with water that cools too quickly. The lamplight catches the wet shine of a plate, the curve of a spoon, the steam lifting from a kettle. Hands feel rough from soap and work. Faces shine softly in the glow, then disappear when someone turns away. Even the air has texture at night. It may be warm with stove heat and cooking smells, or cool with draughts finding every weakness in the walls. The atmosphere is intimate because darkness compresses the world. Reading by lamp or candle deserves special sympathy. You hold a book close, you angle the page to catch the best light. Print swims a little if the day has been long. The eyes tire. Still, many people treasured these moments. Newspapers, when available, were read and reread. Letters from family carried enormous value. Books, almanacs, Bibles, dime novels, and borrowed volumes offered knowledge, comfort, or escape. That a person would strain tired eyes under a weak lamp after a hard day tells you something important. Evening reading was not casual background entertainment. It was chosen. Children often meet the dark differently from adults. For them, lamplight can make a room feel enchanted or alarming, sometimes both within the same minute. Shadows on a ceiling may resemble branches, animals, or people. A gust of wind can produce instant theories about wolves, thieves, ghosts, or all three working together. Frontier folklore made rich use of darkness because darkness did half the storytelling already. Adults might smile at childish fears while privately keeping an ear tuned to unusual sounds outside. The night encouraged imagination, even among the practical. Bedrooms are dimmer still. Many families do not waste their best light there for long. You might carry a candle to bed, shielding the flame with your hand as melted wax threatens your fingers and the draught in the hallway tries to blow out your plans. In a small room, the candle makes washstand, blanket, boots, and wall pegs appear one by one, then you pinch it out, or blow gently, and the dark rushes back so fast it almost feels alive. That instant is startling even when expected. 1 second you're in a room, the next you're in blackness. This is perhaps the greatest difference electricity would later bring. It would not merely provide more light, it would change the emotional meaning of night. In 1870, darkness still carries authority. It tells the body to slow down. It makes distance feel larger. It reminds you that walls are thin, roads uncertain, and the world beyond your lamp mostly invisible. You can push back against that authority for a little while with flame and oil, but only a little. There are pleasures in it too. A lamplit evening has softness that bright modern rooms often lack. Skin tones warm, wood glows honey-coloured, simple objects become handsome. A cup, a loaf, a folded shawl, a deck of cards, all look more substantial under gentle light. People speak more quietly without meaning to. The hour invites reflection. Even a tired silence by the stove can feel full rather than empty. You do not need a dozen distractions when the room itself seems to breathe with low light and warmth. A quirky little frontier habit appears in many places once darkness falls. People become excellent conservers of motion. Since every extra trip to another room or out into the yard requires effort, light, and probably a muttered complaint, they think ahead. Bring the bucket now, lay out the blankets now, check the latch now, bank the fire now. Evening encourages planning through simple laziness mixed with survival wisdom, which is one of humanity's most reliable partnerships. Not everyone experiences these nights equally. Wealthier households may have several lamps, better glass, cleaner fuel, and more comfortable rooms. A hotel parlour or prosperous home can appear quite cheerful. Poorer families make do with less light, fewer candles, and more darkness at the edges of every task. Yet across class lines, the basic truth remains. Night is expensive to illuminate. Most people use only what they need, so you lower the wick a little. The flame shrinks, steady and amber. The room settles into that final hour when voices become softer and chairs feel heavier under tired bodies. Beyond the window there is no electric glow from neighbouring houses, no distant wash of streetlights, no bright horizon from a city over the next hill. The sky is broad, the stars sharp when clouds allow, and the dark between houses thick enough to seem almost touchable. Inside, your lamp keeps its small territory. It is enough for a bowl, a hand, a face, a page, a prayer, a last bit of mending, no more than that. But for one more evening in the Wild West, it is enough. By now you have learned that survival in the Wild West of 1870 is less about one grand heroic struggle, and more about an endless parade of ordinary needs. Water is needed, then more water. Clothes are dirty, then dirtier. Faces must be washed, kettles filled, floors scrubbed, dishes rinsed, animals watered, and meals cooked. Without electricity, none of these things happen invisibly. There is no pump humming in the wall, no washer spinning in a laundry closet, no cheerful little appliance pretending domestic work is a lifestyle choice. There is only your body, the bucket, the basin, and the dust, which always seems to feel welcome. Water shapes the day more than almost anything else. You do not simply turn toward a sink and expect obedience. You fetch it, perhaps from a well, where a rope rubs rough against your palm and the bucket comes up cold, dripping and heavier than you remembered, perhaps from a hand pump, which is a fine invention but still demands effort, your arm rising and falling until the metal handle feels slick and stubborn, perhaps from a creek, a barrel, an irrigation ditch, or a spring if your luck and geography are unusually cooperative. However it arrives, water must first be hunted, lifted, and carried. You become deeply aware of weight. A full bucket is not theoretical. It pulls at the shoulder, bites into the fingers, and sloshes against your skirt or trouser leg. If the path is uneven, some of it ends up on your boots. If the weather is cold, the splash is especially offensive. If the weather is hot, you begin to calculate every cup with the seriousness of a banker. This is one reason frontier households learned thrift in a practical, physical way. Waste was not a bad idea in the abstract. Waste meant carrying that burden for nothing. A wash basin on a stand looks simple enough, but it represents a whole chain of labour. The pitcher had to be filled. The water had to be warmed if comfort mattered and fuel allowed. A towel had to be washed and dried somewhere. Soap had to be purchased or made. A person standing at the basin for a morning wash is not using a convenience. They are spending a resource. Even clean hands have a supply line. Bathing, naturally, is much less frequent and much less luxurious than modern people would prefer to imagine. A full bath requires serious commitment. Water must be heated in quantity, then poured into a tub, or at least into some large vessel fit for the purpose. In many households, this is not an everyday affair. People wash face, hands, neck, and other strategic regions between fuller baths. This was not frontier people being lazy or uncivilized. It was simple mathematics. Cleanliness mattered, but the labour involved shaped what was realistic. The smell of washing day is its own frontier weather system. Warm, wet cloth, strong soap, damp wood floors, steam rising from kettles, stale dust brought back to life by scrubbing. In a small house, the whole place seems to exhale moisture. Sleeves are rolled, arms ache, fingers wrinkle in the water. Fabric is rubbed against itself, against a washboard, against the limits of patience. Shirts, petticoats, drawers, socks, work trousers, aprons, baby clothes, towels. Every piece has collected sweat, soot, grease, dust, and the memory of yesterday's labour. A washboard is one of those inventions that deserve respect without inviting affection. It helps. It also asks you to scrape cloth over ridges until your hands and wrists begin filing quiet complaints. The sound is repetitive and sharp, a wet rasp in the room or yard. Soap slicks the fabric, but dirt does not surrender out of politeness. Then the garments must be rinsed, then wrung, then hung to dry in sun, wind, or near the stove, depending on weather. A line of laundry snapping in a frontier wind can look almost festive, though the person who washed it may be in no mood for poetry. One quirky detail of the period is how many households used homemade soap that could be harsh by modern standards. Soap often came from animal fat and lye. Useful and effective, but not exactly a spa product. It could leave skin dry and rough, and if poorly made, it might be strong enough to irritate badly. Yet soap making itself was a valuable domestic skill. Saving grease, leaching lye from wood ash, boiling the mixture, and pouring it to harden formed part of a larger household economy in which very little was wasted. Frontier life loved to turn leftovers into chores. Water was not just for people and linens. Animals needed it too, and often in large amounts. Horses, mules, cattle, chickens, pigs. All of them placed their own claims on the household supply or nearby sources. Troughs must be checked, buckets filled, frozen surfaces broken in winter, mud managed around watering spots in wet seasons. Anyone romanticising the Old West should spend 5 quiet minutes considering the logistics of watering several large animals by hand and then report back with revised levels of enthusiasm. Scarcity made everything more complicated. In drier regions of the West, water could determine where people settled, how far they travelled, and whether a season ended in comfort or anxiety. Historians still argue over how much booster literature and later mythology softened the daily stress of water access for settlers in arid places. Some promotional accounts painted land as more generous than it proved to be. Real families learned quickly that a promising brochure and a stubborn landscape are not the same thing. If a well failed or a creek ran low, domestic routine turned into a crisis. Dust, meanwhile, behaves as if it has signed a long lease on your life. It comes in through doors, through cracks, on boots, on hems, on wagon wheels, in wind, in dry weather, after chores, during chores, and quite possibly before chores just to establish dominance. You sweep one room and another looks offended that you have not yet gotten to it. In town, the streets may send up powdery clouds under passing wagons and hooves. In the country, dry ground and open wind do the same. Dust settles on tables, shelves, dishes, bedding, lamp chimneys, and skin. It dulls everything. Housekeeping becomes a war of attrition. Brooms scratch over rough boards, rugs are beaten outside, blankets are aired, windows, if you have them in quantity, collect grime astonishingly fast. A clean house on the frontier does not mean a polished perfection suitable for magazine photography. It means active resistance. It means someone has made a determined effort against a world committed to tracking itself indoors. You also notice how closely food preparation ties into water labour. A pot of beans must be soaked or boiled. Coffee requires water. Bread requires water. Dishes afterward require still more. If guests arrive, hospitality carries physical cost. A generous hostess does not merely offer food and drink. She offers the household's labour stored in pails, kettles, flour sacks, and wood piles. Even tea, if available, begins with someone lifting something heavy. Children are often drafted into this watery universe early. They carry smaller buckets, fetch extra soap, hang laundry, stir boiling clothes with a stick, or mind younger siblings while an adult deals with the latest domestic flood. Whether they do these tasks cheerfully depends on temperament, weather, and the presence of supervision. Many frontier memoirs mention children helping with water and washing, because these chores were constant enough to shape memory. There is only so much nostalgia a person can apply to repeated bucket trips. Personal comfort is therefore rationed by effort. You may long for a long soak after a hard day, but longing does not heat kettles. You may wish for cool drinking water on demand, but someone must draw and store it, often in crocks, barrels, or pitchers that still leave you tasting a little mineral, wood, or tin. You may want fresh linens frequently, but laundry teaches humility. Frontier people were not less interested in comfort than we are. They simply paid a much steeper price for it. Town life offered some relief in certain places. Public wells, pumps, laundresses, bathhouses, hotel services, or nearby streams could make some routines easier, especially for travellers or those with money. Yet even in towns, electric pumps and modern plumbing were not transforming ordinary households in 1870. The more developed a settlement became, the more services it might gather, but most people still lived in close acquaintance with hauling, washing, spilling, drying, and trying again. The body feels all of this. Shoulders tighten from carrying water. Lower backs complain from lifting tubs or bent scrubbing. Hands chap, crack, and redden from soap, wind, and repeated wetting. Fingernails collect a little darkness from work no matter how carefully you wash. Clothes dry stiff on the line, then soften with wear. In summer, sweat and dust form a paste along the neck and wrists. In winter, cold water stings the skin so sharply that simple washing becomes a test of character. Civilization, you notice, is often just a series of methods for avoiding cold water. The frontier has not yet perfected them. Even drinking water can be uncertain. Some sources are fresh and sweet, others are muddy, mineral heavy, or suspicious enough to inspire boiling when possible. Knowledge of local water mattered. Settlers learned which wells held through drought, which creek turns stayed cleaner, and which standing pools invited trouble. Germ theory was still gaining acceptance in the 19th century, and everyday understanding of disease varied widely. But people knew perfectly well that bad water often led to sickness even if they explained the cause differently. In a cabin or a small house near evening, after the washing's done and the bucket stand filled for the next need, there can be a brief sense of victory. The floor smells faintly damp and cleaner than before. Towels hang near the stove. Shirts and aprons move on the line outside or drape over chairs and pegs indoors. A basin reflects the low light. The air has lost some of its dust for an hour or two. That small orderliness feels earned. It is earned. The truth is that waterwork and cleaning work are never finished for long. Another meal will dirty dishes. Another day will soil clothes. Another wind will sweep grit under the door. Another animal will kick over a bucket or splash a trough. Another child will discover a puddle with exactly the wrong shoes on. Life without electricity is full of these recurring negotiations with the most basic elements. It is not dramatic in the way a duel is dramatic. It is more constant, more tiring, and much more universal. And yet people made homes in this world. They found pride in fresh linens, in a swept floor, in a clean child on Sunday, in a full water barrel before nightfall. They learned where to place the washstand, how to save steps, how to reuse water wisely, how to dry clothes fastest, how to keep soap from disappearing too quickly, how to judge a cloud and decide whether laundry should stay out. Domestic knowledge became its own kind of frontier expertise, quiet but essential. So you carry one more bucket, you set it down with a soft, heavy thump. Your palms hold the memory of the handle, your sleeves smell faintly of soap and damp cloth. Dust still waits outside with infinite patience, but for this moment the cups are rinsed. The basin is filled, the floor is passable, and the household can breathe a little easier. In the Wild West of 1870, that is no small achievement. It is the hidden labour beneath nearly every ordinary day, measured in water, muscle, and stubborn resolve. You do not keep weather outside in the Wild West of 1870. You endure it at close range. It leans through the walls, presses under the door, rattles the window, settles on the roof, and alters your temper before breakfast has fully committed itself. Without electricity, there is no quiet system hidden behind plaster to smooth away the edges of heat or cold. No fan turns lazily overhead. No furnace hums in the background like a loyal servant. The season comes directly to you, and it expects to be noticed. A frontier house can offer shelter, certainly, but shelter is not the same thing as control. Many cabins and small homes are built quickly, from local timber, sod, adobe, or rough boards, depending on region. Each material carries its own advantages, flaws, smells, and opinions. Wood walls can creak in wind and shrink in dry air. Sod houses may hold warmth better, but bring their own earthy scent and occasional insect politics. Adobe can be wonderfully useful in some climates, cool in heat and solid when maintained, yet it too answers to rain, cracking, and care. A house is less a sealed machine than a negotiated truce with the land. In winter, the cold makes itself known before you even open your eyes. It touches the nose, the ears, the fingertips outside the blanket. The sheet or quilt feels cool and a little stiff, and the air in the room has that thin, clean bite which tells you the fire burned low hours ago. The boards underfoot are merciless. Your first breath fogs faintly in front of you if the room is cold enough, which is a very rude way for the morning to announce itself. You dress quickly not from efficiency, but from self-respect. The stove or hearth fights back as best it can, but heat in these homes is local. You learn the geography of warmth right beside the stove. Your shins may roast while your back remains chilly. Near the bed, the air may still bite. In corners, cold lingers with stubborn dignity. If the room has draughts, and many do, then winter seems to creep around the edges of every board and seam. A rolled cloth at the door, extra blankets over a window, or a rug against the wall can all help a little. Frontier comfort often depends on the little. Snow can transform the landscape into something almost holy, or deeply inconvenient, often before noon. It settles on fences, wagon tracks, rooftops, and the backs of waiting animals. It muffles sound so that a town or homestead feels briefly wrapped in quiet. Hooves crunch instead of clatter. Voices seem smaller. Smoke from chimneys rises straight into the pale air if there is no wind. It looks lovely from inside, provided the woodpile is full and the roof is behaving. Beauty on the frontier tends to improve when supplies are good. When supplies are not good, winter becomes serious very quickly. Water freezes in buckets and troughs. Hands crack from cold and soap. Laundry stiffens on the line into cloth shaped by weather rather than by human intention. A trip to the outhouse at night acquires the emotional weight of military duty. Frost gathers along window edges in delicate patterns that would be charming if your toes were not numb. People warmed bricks or stones near the fire, wrapped them and tucked them into beds or foot warmers. Not elegant, but wonderfully persuasive. The smell of winter indoors is distinctive. Wood smoke hangs heavier. Wool blankets hold the scent of dry fibre and human sleep. Wet boots thawing near the stove add their own contribution. Earthy and not entirely noble. Stew, coffee, and hot bread smell richer in cold weather. Perhaps because you need them more. A room full of winter clothing drying by the fire has a dense, lived-in smell. Part damp cloth, part smoke, part effort. It is not unpleasant once it belongs to your own home. It is simply the odour of survival. Yet cold is only one side of the bargain. Summer on the frontier can feel equally personal. Without electric fans, refrigeration, or cooled indoor air, heat settles into rooms and sits there with astonishing confidence. In a cabin under strong sun, the roof may radiate warmth downward. Walls hold the afternoon and release it slowly. Cooking becomes a punishment carried out in public. A stove in July is not a domestic appliance. It is a test of loyalty. You stand near it while sweat gathers under the collar, down the back at the temples. Flour clings to damp hands. The air smells of baking, grease, dust, and hot metal. Windows are opened whenever possible, though open windows invite flies, dust, and sometimes opinions from the street. Doors stand ajar, curtains stir, a breeze, if one arrives, is greeted with gratitude so sincere it borders on worship. Shade becomes a strategy rather than a pleasant extra. People work earlier, pause when they can, and do what modern people still do in heat despite all our technology. They complain, fan themselves, and stare at the horizon as if trying to reason with the sun. A hand fan, a hat brim, a wet cloth at the neck, a shaded porch, a cellar, all become precious in summer. Homes built with thick walls in certain regions cope better than light frame structures. Deep porches help, trees help. Good orientation to wind helps. The 19th century understood passive cooling far better than many people assume, because survival encouraged practical design. Historians still debate how much Eastern advice on home building truly suited Western conditions, since settlers often copied familiar styles before learning what the local climate thought of those ideas. The climate, naturally, had strong views. Rain brings its own sensations on a good roof. It is music on a bad roof. It is a meeting notice. The smell of rain on dry earth rises quickly. Mineral and rich, almost sweet in some places. Mud follows close behind. Yard, street, and path become sticky, slippery, and thoroughly committed to ruining your hem. Wagon wheels sink. Boots gain weight. Animals track the outdoors indoors with little remorse. Children, of course, are magnetically drawn to the worst patches, proving once again that youth is both hopeful and damp. Thunderstorms on the plains can feel enormous. Light flashes hard across the sky. Thunder rolls and then cracks so sharply the walls seem to answer. Rain slaps the roof in bursts. Wind presses against shutters or whistles through gaps with unpleasant confidence. Lightning fires were a real danger, especially where buildings, hay, and dry timber stood ready for trouble. Families watched the sky closely because they had to. Weather forecasts did not arrive through broadcast or phone. Knowledge came from clouds, wind, smell, local memory, and the expressions of older neighbours who had seen that sky before. Then there is wind alone, which may be the most relentless companion of all. In open country it never really feels absent for long. It hums at the eaves, pushes smoke sideways, lifts loose dust, rattles harness, sways signs, and finds the one crack in the wall you had hoped it might politely ignore. Wind can cool you in summer and cut through you in winter. It can bring relief or misery without changing its general method. On some nights it keeps people awake simply by insisting that every board, latch, and roof edge participate in the conversation. Dust storms and dry winds make entire houses feel permeable. Fine grit settles on tables, bedding, lamp chimneys, and supper. You wipe it away and find more tomorrow. Some frontier residents hung damp cloths or used other little tricks to catch dust, though success was always partial. A house during dry windy weather may smell of heated boards, old cloth, stove soot, and earth itself. You do not quite live apart from the landscape. You inhale part of it. Spring is less a gentle season than a noisy argument between mud, thaw, runoff and hope. Snowmelt swell streams. Roads soften. Wheel ruts fill. Animals shed. Fields demand attention. Nothing is tidy. A yard may alternate between puddle and sticky clay within the same day. Yet spring also brings fresh smells that feel almost extravagant after winter. Damp grass, new leaves, turned earth, morning air that no longer bites the lungs. Doors open wider. Blankets are aired. The whole settlement seems to stretch its shoulders. Autumn carries another sort of pressure. The air sharpens. Sunlight turns mellow and slants low across fields and yards. Nights grow colder. Every household begins quietly counting what must be done before winter closes in. Food preserved, fuel gathered, roof checked, cracks stuffed, wool brought out. The smell of autumn often includes drying corn, smoke from burning brush or stubble, apples if your area is blessed with them, and the first heavy use of the stove again. There is beauty in it, but no one sensible mistakes beauty for leisure. Clothing becomes part of climate control because there is so little mechanical help. Layers matter, wool matters, hats matter, gloves, shawls, aprons, scarves, heavy skirts, thick socks, coats lined or unlined according to means. All these are not fashion alone. They are portable shelter. A woman working indoors in winter might still wear shawls and extra layers because the house cannot maintain one stable temperature. A man at dawn may wear coat and hat indoors until the stove wins its slow battle. Textiles do much of the work later assigned to switches and thermostats. Animals reveal the weather too. Horses turn their hindquarters to the wind. Chickens huddle or seek shade. Dogs curl tighter in cold and sprawl in heat. Cattle bunch up under bad skies or spread lazily when the day is forgiving. People watch these signs because they are useful, and because in a world without screens there is more attention available for such things. You notice the smell of coming rain. You feel the pressure drop. You look up. One oddly charming frontier habit is the seasonal rearrangement of domestic life. In winter, chairs gather closer to the stove. In summer, people drift toward porches, open doors, breezier corners, and outdoor shade whenever work allows. Beds may be dressed differently. Food choices shift with the weather because preservation and appetite change. Even conversation moves around climate. People compare winters, winds, droughts, late frosts, hard freezes, and storms the way modern people compare software bugs. Weather is the system you're all running, whether you like it or not. There is a scholarly uncertainty, too, about how quickly settlers truly adapted to local climates. Diaries and letters suggest a mix of ingenuity and stubborn misjudgment. Some newcomers learned fast. Others clung to habits from wetter, cooler, or more protected regions and suffered for it. The West taught blunt lessons: build better shade, store more fuel, dig deeper, plant differently. Do not assume the land cares what worked back east. In the evening, when the day's weather finally loosens its grip, the house reflects everything it has endured. Walls may still radiate heat or hold lingering chill. Boots by the door carry mud, dust, or snow. Damp coats steam faintly near the stove. Open windows admit cooler air and the smell of night grass, or must be shut fast against the rising wind. A pitcher of water feels wonderfully cold in summer. dangerously cold in winter. Your own skin remembers the day. Sun on the neck, dryness at the lips, smoke in the hair, cracked knuckles, dust at the cuffs. Living without electricity in the Wild West means weather is never background scenery. It is architecture, schedule, household manager, and sometime bully. It shapes the walls, the chores, the meals, the sleep, and the mood of every room. You do not choose your climate settings. You meet them in person, day after day, season after season, and build your life around their moods. That is the plain truth of it. The house stands, the stove glows, the wind answers, and you learn to call that home. After dark, a frontier town does not go silent. It changes register. The bright labour of day gives way to a thinner, stranger music made of hoofbeats, voices, fiddles, doors, dogs, and the occasional sound of someone making a poor decision with great confidence. Without electricity, an 1870 night does not flatten everything under one even wash of light and noise. Instead, each sound stands alone for a moment, clean and distinct, as if the dark has polished it. You step into the evening street and feel at once how different a town is from daylight. The outlines are softer now. Storefronts that looked practical by afternoon seem almost theatrical under lamplight. A saloon doorway spills yellow glow onto the dirt. A hotel window shines above the boardwalk. Somewhere farther off, a lantern swings and makes a moving oval on the ground. Most of the street lies in shadow, but not in emptiness. The dark is populated by noises. Wagons still pass now and then, though less often than by day. You hear the slow complaint of wooden wheels, the steady knock of loose boards, the harness chains clinking softly with each jolt. Hooves strike packed earth with a muted thud or ring against stonier ground. A horse snorts, stamps, and tosses its head, leather creaking in answer. Without motor traffic to smear all sound into one constant roar, every vehicle announces its own personality. Even a familiar wagon can often be recognised by the rhythm of its approach. Animals are never fully off duty in a western town. Horses shift in livery stables, bite at hay, paw the floor, or knock a hoof against plank walls. Mules add their own more judgmental opinions. Dogs roam, bark, investigate, and occasionally hold lengthy debates with one another across alleys and yards. Chickens mutter in coops, in places where pigs still wander too freely, which is more than anyone truly wants. You may hear a snuffle or grunt in the street margins. One thing frontier towns do not suffer from is acoustic sterility. Human voices carry astonishingly far. A laugh outside a saloon may skip down the block. A short argument on a porch can be followed by half the street, whether invited or not. Men calling to one another from stable to doorway sound much closer than they would in a modern city. Women returning from a neighbour's house speak in lower tones, but even quiet speech travels when the air is still. A child crying in one house may be audible from the next lot over. Privacy, like indoor plumbing, exists by degree. Saloons provide the most famous evening soundtrack, and for once the legend is not entirely exaggerating. In a lively place you might hear piano notes stumbling through popular tunes, a fiddle soaring out a dance air, boots striking floorboards, glasses meeting tabletops, and conversation swelling and falling like surf. Not every saloon is full of melodrama and card sharks with poetic cheekbones. Many are simply social rooms for drink, news, warmth, and company. Still, the atmosphere can turn rowdy quickly, especially where paydays, loneliness, and whiskey collaborate. The smell around such places tells its own story. Tobacco smoke hangs thick in the doorway. Spilled beer and stronger liquor soak into wood. Kerosene from lamps adds a sharp, oily note. Wet wool, leather coats, sweat, and dust round out the bouquet. A frontier saloon is not trying to smell attractive. It is trying to remain standing. Yet people are drawn there because nighttime in an unelectrified world can feel long, and a bright noisy room offers relief from the press of darkness. Beyond the saloons, quieter sounds shape the town as much as any revelry. A smithy cooling down for the night may still give off one final ring of iron. A boarding-house door opens and shuts with regular purpose. Cutlery taps against crockery in a hotel dining room finishing late suppers. Somewhere a baby wails, then settles. Somewhere a hand pump squeaks for the last filling of a bucket. Somewhere two neighbours talk over a fence in the dark because evening is the only time either of them has to spare. You become aware of footsteps too. Boots on boardwalks produce crisp, hollow notes. Boots in dirt are softer, with the occasional scrape of grit. Someone hurries, and the sound sharpens. Someone wanders, and it drags. In towns with wooden sidewalks, which many Western settlements had in one form or another, the boards can amplify movement so neatly that you may judge mood from pace alone. A brisk, purposeful tread means business or weather. A weaving tread means the saloon has won another small victory. Church bells or courthouse bells, where a town is developed enough to boast such things, can mark the hour or call attention to danger. Their sound at night travels widely and lands differently in the ear than daytime bells. After dark, a bell does not merely inform, it stirs. It suggests urgency, gathering, concern. Fire bells especially could snap a whole settlement awake. In towns built of timber, canvas, and confidence, that sound carried a very specific chill. Even people half asleep knew what flames could do. Fire companies themselves added to the nighttime soundscape when needed. The rattle of wheels, shouted orders, boots pounding, buckets passing hand to hand. The wild confusion of a town trying not to become ash. Historians still argue about how often later Western fiction overstated nightly violence and alarms. But no one disputes the constant awareness of fire. A single lamp overturned, a stovepipe fault, a spark in a stable loft. And suddenly the whole dark town has one problem only. In calmer moments, night sounds can be unexpectedly delicate. Wind brushes a signboard until it taps lightly against its bracket. A loose shutter clicks. The canvas cover on a wagon flutters once and settles. Insects sing in warm weather. Not in a modern suburban chorus softened by distant traffic, but in clear, isolated threads. Crickets can seem impossibly loud when everything else pauses. Frogs, if there is water nearby, add their notes from ditches, ponds, or creek edges. Nature does not fall mute just because people have finished supper. A quirky feature of frontier acoustics is how much people learned from listening. In a world with less artificial noise, the ear became a kind of early warning system. You could tell whether a rider was approaching fast or slow, whether a horse was shod or not, whether a wagon was heavy loaded, whether weather was changing by the way wind moved through certain gaps and eaves. Many people could identify neighbours by cough, step, laugh, or the voice without seeing them. The dark made listeners skilled. Inside homes. The tone is softer, but no less rich. Chairs creak as tired bodies settle. Needles move through cloth with a faint dry sound. A spoon circles a cup. Someone clears a throat near the stove. The low murmur of reading aloud fills a room in a way that seems almost physical under lamplight. If a family has music, evening is a good time for it. A hymn, a folk song, a fiddle tune half remembered, a harmonica played on a porch. These sounds do not fight with machines. They have room to breathe. Porches deserve their own mention. On warm nights they become social stages. People sit in rocking chairs or on steps, taking whatever breeze the hour provides. From there they talk across yards, greet passers-by, shell peas, smoke, mend harness, or simply stare into the dark with the sort of thoughtful fatigue that frontier life produces in quantity. Porches make private life slightly public and public life slightly softer. They are listening posts as much as resting places. Distance behaves strangely at night. A train whistle far away can sound hauntingly near, especially out on open land. By 1870 the railroads were reshaping the West, and where tracks ran close enough, the whistle and rumble became part of local life. The sound might arrive thin and lonely through the dark, followed by the faint metallic rush of wheels. It carried modernity with it, though most homes along its route still depended on lamps, wood, and hand labour once the sound had passed. Progress often announces itself before it truly arrives. There is also the matter of fear, quietly present even in ordinary towns. Darkness leaves room for concern, a stranger's footsteps behind you, a horse loose in the street, a drunk growing louder, weather moving in, a sick child worsening after midnight. The western night was not always dangerous, but it could feel uncertain in a way brightly lit modern streets often do not. People carried lanterns, stayed near familiar routes, and used common sense where they could. Common sense, of course, is less impressive in stories than a gunfight, but far more useful. Popular myth has long overstated how many nights ended in dramatic shootouts beneath swinging signs. Most western towns were occupied by working people with chores in the morning, and even the disorderly ones spent more time on drinking, gossip, cards, and arguments than on cinematic violence. Still, the possibility of trouble-shaped behaviour, a raised voice might draw attention fast. A sudden silence in a saloon could mean curiosity or danger. A sheriff, marshal, or town constable needed to read sound as much as faces. Scholars still debate how closely later dime novels and films resemble the real emotional texture of Western nights. The evidence suggests something more mixed and more human. Yes, there was roughness. Yes, there was crime in some places. But there was also boredom, companionship, music, routine, and the plain relief of hearing another person's voice after a day of labour. Nighttime sociability mattered precisely because darkness could feel so large. A crowded room, a porch conversation, a fiddle tune from down the block, all pushed back against that largeness. Even the sky contributes to the soundscape by changing behaviour beneath it. On clear nights, people linger outdoors longer, moving through starlight that gives just enough shape to fences and roofs. Under cloud cover, the dark deepens and people cluster closer to lamps and one another. Moonlight can brighten a whole street enough for late walking and easier travel. No moon leaves everything narrower and more cautious. The town sounds different depending on what the sky allows. Toward the later hours, the noise is thin. One by one, windows go dark. The saloon may still mutter and laugh, but more softly now. Horses quiet in their stalls. A last wagon rattles home. Somewhere a door bar drops into place. The wind becomes easier to hear. Then a dog's bark carries over a much wider silence than before. It sounds almost ceremonial, a final reminder that the settlement is not asleep all at once, only settling in layers. This is what a town gives you after sundown in the Wild West of 1870. Not silence, but a world composed of separate living sounds, each with a room around it, hoofbeats, laughter, a piano played with more enthusiasm than accuracy, a baby in a boarding house, men on a porch, wind at a signboard, harness chains, crickets in the weeds, the hiss of a lamp through an open door. All of it rises into the dark without electric glare to blur the edges. You listen, and by listening you understand the place. It is still awake. It is still human. It is still very much alive. Once the lamps are lowered and the voices fade, the distance between people begins to feel larger than the map suggests. Living without electricity in the Wild West of 1870 means you're never very far from silence, and silence has a way of enlarging every worry. A neighbour may be only a mile away. A town may be only a short ride in good weather. Family may be reachable by letter, by stage, by train, by rumour, by hope. Yet after sundown, when the road disappears into dark and the house settles into its own small circle of light, you feel how separate one life can be from another. This is not merely loneliness in the modern sense, where a person sits beneath 3 devices and declares the world emotionally unavailable. This is physical isolation. If you need someone, they are not a quick text away, not a call away, not even always a safe walk away. They are across darkness, mud, wind, snow, prairie, creek, or empty road. That changes the mind. It teaches patience, yes, but also a very particular kind of endurance. A solitary cabin at night can feel smaller than it looked by day. Lamplight reaches the table, the stove, a bit of wall, perhaps your own hands. Beyond that, the room recedes. Outside lies the yard, the fence, the animals if you have them, the road if there is one, and then the rest of the land, wide and mostly unseen. The sound of the wind at the eaves becomes more personal. A loose board or rattling latch seems suddenly intimate, as if the house is speaking under its breath. If you live alone, or spend evenings alone because work has taken others elsewhere, the hours after dark must be managed with care. Many frontier people developed routines for precisely this reason. Feed the fire, check the door, set out what you need for morning, mend something, read a little, write a little, pray perhaps. Small repeated actions help keep the mind steady when the darkness outside has no visible edge. Routine is a fence the mind builds for itself. Letters matter enormously in such a world. A single envelope can carry affection, advice, news, grief, gossip, instruction, and relief all at once. You do not receive messages casually. You wait for them, you reread them, you keep them folded in boxes, Bibles, pockets, apron drawers, or under clothing in a trunk. A letter from home may smell faintly of paper, dust, ink, and whatever room it crossed before reaching your hands. The handwriting itself becomes almost tactile company. A person far away has touched this page. That fact is no small comfort. The pace of communication creates a special kind of suspense. News travels, but slowly. A family illness, a birth, a death, a marriage, a crop failure, a military movement, a political change, a business chance. Any of these might take days or weeks to reach you depending on your location and the available routes. By the time information arrives, the event itself may already belong to the past in a very settled way. You learn to live with uncertainty longer than most people now tolerate before checking the weather again. The telegraph does exist by 1870, and in some parts of the West it has already transformed business, railroad coordination, and urgent communication. That is true, and it matters. But telegraph access is not the same as living in a home connected by easy instant contact. A telegraph office in town might send a brief important message, often at cost, often for serious reasons, but it does not abolish the emotional experience of distance. It simply makes distance occasionally interruptible. One of the odd emotional truths of this life is that the mind becomes a better traveller than the body can be. In the evening, people remember places. They picture relatives back east, old streets, old churches, a childhood kitchen, a riverbank, a city boarding house, a farm left behind, a mother's voice, a brother's laugh. Memory becomes social company. So does imagination. Where is he now? Did she receive the letter? Are they warm enough? Has the baby started walking? Have the apples come in? Did the rain ever arrive? The dark gives these questions room. For women especially, isolation on the frontier could weigh heavily, particularly in remote homesteads far from regular companionship. Diaries and letters often reveal longing for conversation, for familiar society, for help with childcare, for the simple relief of another adult presence during long stretches of labour. Men felt loneliness too, of course, whether out herding, prospecting, driving freight, or wintering in sparse settlements. But the myth of cheerful masculine self-sufficiency often hid how much they depended emotionally on letters, visits, bunkhouse talk, or town nights. Historians still argue over whether later frontier memory deliberately softened loneliness in order to make endurance look more heroic. It very well may have. Children experience this distance differently. To them, a dark night may feel immense because the world beyond the lamp is almost abstract. Grandparents become stories if they live far away. Cousins are names in letters. A journey to town becomes an event. The arrival of a visitor breaks ordinary time like a holiday. Even hearing fresh news from another region can stir excitement, because other places remain vivid but unreachable. Childhood on the frontier often expands the imagination for exactly this reason. So much of life is known indirectly. You notice how important visiting becomes in such a world. To come by in the evening, to sit for coffee, to share talk, to bring news, to borrow yeast or thread, to help with a sick child, to offer company during a storm or after a funeral. These are not tiny gestures. They are acts of social survival. A neighbour's lantern approaching across the dark yard can feel wonderfully reassuring. Hospitality grows out of need as much as kindness. You offer a chair because one day you may need one offered to you. The sounds of isolation are subtle. The tick of a clock if you own one. The soft settling of the house. The wind. Your own movements louder than expected in the room. The turning of a page. The needle through cloth. A log shifting in the stove. In a modern space, background noise often hides the self. Here, the self is quite audible. That can be peaceful. It can also be unsettling. There are evenings when the quiet settles over you like a blanket. There are others when it sits on the chest like a cat with private grievances. Religion often filled part of this emotional space. Evening prayers, Bible reading, hymns softly sung, Sabbath gatherings when possible, all gave people language for uncertainty and absence. Faith did not eliminate loneliness, but it offered structure, consolation, and a feeling of belonging to something larger than one isolated household on one dark patch of land. For many frontier families, spiritual routine was inseparable from emotional survival. Books did similar work in a different register. Newspapers from old hometowns, almanacs, novels, memoirs, sermons, poems, school readers, all could widen the room after dark. Reading aloud was especially powerful because it made one voice carry more than one life. A story read by lamplight could create company from paper. The world entered through words because it could not easily enter by road at that hour. In that sense, evening reading was more than entertainment. It was a bridge. A quirky frontier truth is that even gossip had a noble side. In small, isolated communities, local talk was not merely idle chatter, it was information flow, social glue, warning system, matchmaking engine, reputation market, and community memory all in one lively package. Who was sick, who had extra seed, who needed help, who was coming through town, which family had received a letter, who might marry, who had quarrelled, in a place where formal communication moved slowly. Gossip did real civic work, even while wearing its least respectable hat. At the same time, solitude could also become strangely satisfying. Not every person in the West felt crushed by distance. Some found real pleasure in the quiet once labour was done. A porch under stars, the cool night air after a hot day, the soft breathing of horses nearby, the immense sky uncluttered by city glow, a sense that the world is both vast and, for 1 hour, entirely still. Frontier loneliness and frontier peace were close relatives. One could slide into the other depending on weather, health, memory, and mood. Moonlight changes everything. Under a strong moon, yards and trails reappear, silvered and ghostly but usable. Fences cast thin bars of shadow. Rooflines shine pale. Trees become shapes again instead of masses. People often took comfort in moonlit nights because the world returned in outline. On moonless nights the dark could feel almost material, as though it filled the spaces between things with weight. A lantern helped, certainly, but only for a small stretch ahead. The moon, when present, belonged to everyone at once. There is also the loneliness of illness, which is perhaps the sharpest kind. If someone falls sick after dark, help may be distant and uncertain. A doctor might be in town, or many miles away, or absent entirely. You wait through the night with a basin, cloth, lamp, and anxious ears, listening to breath, fever, cough, or silence. In such hours, the lack of instant communication becomes painfully clear. You cannot summon assistance with a button. You can only endure the interval between need and arrival. Widowhood, migration, military service, cattle drives, mining work, railroad labour, and seasonal separation all intensified the emotional geography of the West. Many households lived with absence built into their normal rhythm. A husband away with stock, a son gone to a rail camp, a daughter married in another territory, a sister still back east, a mother buried far from where her children later settled. The West was full of people living among one set of bodies while missing another. Night made that visible. Scholars still differ on whether frontier communities were generally more tightly knit than later memory claims, or whether isolation often remained sharper and more persistent than the mythology of neighbourly mutual aid suggests. The answer seems to be both. Help existed. So did great distances. Kindness mattered. So did weather. Community was real, but not magical. It could not abolish geography. Even in town, where voices and hoofbeats still pass the window, a person can feel far from those who matter most. The boarding house room, the bunk in a shared cabin, the rented corner in a storekeeper's loft, the cot in a line shack, all these can hold a certain evening ache. Men wrote letters by weak lamplight and folded them slowly. Women stared into the stove after the children slept and counted months. Teenagers dreamed of places they had never seen. Older people wondered whether they would see old places again. Loneliness is not always noisy. Often it is just the extra moment before blowing out the candle. And yet people continued. They formed clubs, churches, schools, singing groups, quilting circles, lodge meetings, card tables, and supper visits because human beings are stubbornly social creatures, even in harsh conditions. They told stories. They shared newspapers. They borrowed books. They rode over to sit with one another. They laughed more than the legend allows. They made company wherever company could be made. So when night settles fully over the Wild West in 1870, the true challenge is not merely darkness itself. It is the way darkness reveals distance between houses, between towns, between letters, between one heart and another. But in that same darkness, a lamp still burns on a table. A page still rustles in the hand. A hymn still rises softly from a nearby room. And somewhere down the road, another human voice answers back. That is how people lived with the loneliness. Not by defeating it completely, but by filling the night with enough small signs of one another to keep the silence from winning. Hard lives do not prevent small pleasures. In fact, they make them shine more clearly. By the time evening settles over the Wild West of 1870, you understand that life without electricity is not built only from labour, cold water, smoke, dust, and weather with an attitude problem. It is also built from comforts so modest that modern people might overlook them entirely. A sweet bite saved for Sunday, a clean shirt, a chair placed in the evening breeze, a fiddle tune floating over a porch rail, a slice of apple pie if the season and fortune have agreed to be unusually generous. The smaller the comfort, the more exactly you feel it. One of the simplest luxuries is stillness without obligation. When the necessary work has finally loosened its grip, even for half an hour, sitting down becomes an event. You lower yourself into a chair whose seat has learned your shape over years of use. The wood press is firm under your back, your boots, if you dare loosen them. Let your feet breathe at last. The room smells of lamp oil, wood smoke, cloth, and the fading memory of supper. Outside, the air may carry dust, hay, sage, rain, or warm earth. Inside, for a short span, nothing demands lifting. Food, of course, becomes one of the great carriers of happiness. Frontier meals can be repetitive, but little variations matter enormously. Fresh butter instead of tired grease, preserves opened in winter, cornbread baked just right, honey if bees are thriving, dried apples stewed soft, molasses spread over warm biscuits, a pot of coffee not boiled into bitterness by neglect. In berry season, pies and preserves can feel almost festive. In orchard country, apples, peaches, or plums provide colour and sweetness that break the long, practical march of beans, salt pork, and bread. A meal does not need to be grand to feel rewarding. It only needs to arrive at the right moment. Candy, when available, is another tiny marvel. Peppermint sticks, horehound drops, or simple sweets from a general store could delight children and adults alike. Not because people in the 19th century were easily impressed, but because sugar carried both flavour and rarity in many places. A pocket treat from town could brighten an entire week. Frontier life teaches the mouth to appreciate what the wallet can rarely indulge. Then there are homemade pleasures, popcorn over the fire, dough fried into simple cakes, jam tucked away in glass jars or crocks, dried herbs for tea, a crock of pickles opened at supper. These things ask effort, but they return something more than calories. They return morale. A household with a few good preserves and something special for company possesses a quiet sort of wealth that never appears properly in dramatic Western legends. Music may be the greatest non-essential essential of all. A fiddle in decent hands can transform a room. A harmonica can follow a man into camp, onto a porch, into a bunkhouse, or beside a fire. A guitar, where one appears, adds softness. A family singing together on an evening with the lamp turned low creates a kind of warmth separate from the stove. Songs are portable comfort. They require no wiring, little equipment, and only enough energy left in the body to let the voice rise. Ballads, hymns, dance tunes, sentimental songs from older homes back east, all pass through Western settlements and lodge there in memory. Dancing belongs in this world too. Not every night, certainly, and not every household, but where neighbours gather, someone may clear a little space and someone else may start a tune. Boots thump, skirts swish, floorboards complain, laughter comes easier. The room, plain a moment ago, suddenly feels important. Social dancing in frontier communities did more than entertain. It loosened loneliness, built courtship, renewed friendships, and reminded tired people that their bodies were not made only for labour. They could move for joy as well. Reading stays precious, especially when books are few. A borrowed novel can travel through several hands before it rests. Newspapers, even older ones, are read carefully for national news, local notices, serialized fiction, and advertisements that promise everything from patent remedies to miraculous farm tools. Almanacs are consulted for weather, dates, moon phases, and useful snippets that hover somewhere between science and folk wisdom. A good reader in a household becomes a kind of evening lantern in human form, drawing others into the circle of a story. A particularly charming feature of frontier life is the way ordinary possessions accumulate emotional richness because there are fewer of them. A quilt stitched by family hands, a china cup carried west in a trunk, a silver watch, a hair ribbon saved for special use, a pipe carved nicely, a wooden toy, a deck of cards softened at the corners, a rocking chair by the stove. These objects become anchors of identity. They are not buried under dozens of replacements and versions. They hold memory because they are used, repaired, handled, and seen every day. Handmade things carry special pride. Quilting, whittling, carving, embroidery, patchwork, braided rugs, beadwork, leatherwork, and simple furniture, making all create beauty inside necessity. On the frontier, decoration often grows out of utility rather than separate from it. A woman may stitch a pattern into something practical because beauty matters even when time is short. A man may carve a handle more neatly than required because the hand likes a good shape. Children make dolls from cloth scraps or toys from wood, corn husks, or whatever the household can spare. Ingenuity is the companion of scarcity. Games help pass the darker hours. Cards are common. Checkers and simple board games appear where someone owns them. Charades, riddles, guessing games, and storytelling cost nothing at all, which gives them a strong advantage. Children improvise elaborate amusements from almost nothing, as children always have. Adults, too, can be playful in ways later stereotypes often ignore. The West was not populated entirely by grim faces staring into the middle distance, while heroic music swelled. People laughed. They teased. They invented nonsense because nonsense lightens labour. A quirky tidbit from frontier social life is the popularity of spelling bees, recitations, and amateur entertainments in many communities. Where formal theatre was rare or absent, local people became the programme. Someone recited poetry. Someone played the fiddle. Someone gave a comic reading. Someone sang badly but with commitment. Churches, schoolhouses, and larger homes could host evenings that mixed sociability with performance. In places hungry for diversion, almost any organised amusement was welcome, so long as it did not end in a broken lamp or a family dispute. Clothing could also feel like a luxury when it rose above bare function. A freshly washed calico dress, a necktie kept for special occasions, polished boots, a decent hat free of last week's dust, a new pair of gloves. These are not trivial vanities. They alter how a person moves through the world. In settlements where many people work in the same handful of garments until fabric shines at the elbows, anything fresh and well kept can lift the spirit. Sunday best exists for a reason. Community gatherings often magnify these little pleasures. Church socials, harvest suppers, quilting bees, dances, fairs, school events, holiday meals, picnics when weather allows, all offer relief from repetition. They also make use of the frontier's strongest social habit, pooling effort. One household brings bread, another brings pie, another lends chairs, another brings music, another provides a wagon ride or a lamp or a room. People create abundance by combining modest resources, which is a remarkably civilized way to answer hardship. Nature itself offers some of the finest luxuries, free of charge, though not always free of mosquitoes. A sunset over open land can feel extravagant because nothing interrupts it with wires or street glare. Stars appear in astonishing numbers. Moonlight across grass, sage, or snow can make even a hard place seem tender for an hour. The smell after rain, the cool air at last after a punishing day, the first spring green along a creek, cottonwood leaves moving in a small breeze. These things do not soften the labour of frontier life, but they do sweeten it. Historians still debate how often later memory romanticised these pleasures, polishing them until the hardships looked picturesque and the exhaustion somehow developed golden edges. That caution is fair. Hardship was real. Yet it would be equally misleading to imagine that people lived in unbroken misery punctuated only by danger and chores. Human beings are much too inventive for that. They find delight in music, food, company, and beauty even under pressure. Perhaps especially under pressure. Photography, though not available to everyone, also brings a quiet wonder to this period. Studio portraits in towns offered a chance to fix a likeness, to send a face back east, to mark your marriage, mourning, or family pride. Sitting for a portrait was an event. Clothes were chosen carefully. Expressions settled into seriousness, not because nobody ever smiled in the 19th century, but because exposure times, custom, and dignity all had their say. A photograph might become one of the most treasured objects in a household, proof that distance had not erased a person from view. Christmas and other holidays carried extra emotional weight in such conditions. A few candles, a ribbon, a special meal, a homemade gift, children hanging stockings or simply hoping near the stove. These moments mattered because they briefly lifted the day above necessity. Even small observances could feel luminous. A holiday was not measured by quantity. It was measured by the effort poured into it and the rarity of the break from routine. One nearly universal luxury was rest itself. An hour with no hauling, chopping, scrubbing, or riding. A Sunday afternoon in decent weather, a bench in shade, a porch after supper, a nap if illness or exhaustion allowed it. The body in 1870 earned its idleness honestly. When muscles stopped for a while, the whole world seemed kinder. The stillness of a resting body is one of history's least celebrated pleasures, though it may be among the greatest. Tobacco and drink also counted as comforts for many adults, though they came with the usual human tendency to overdo a good thing. A pipe by the fire, a chew after hard work, a glass shared in town, all could serve as ritual as much as indulgence. These habits were woven into daily culture, especially among men, though certainly not limited to them. One should not mistake every frontier comfort for sweetness and song. Some comforts were sharper, smokier, and less respectable, which is very often how adults prefer them. Pets and companion animals deserve their share as well. Dogs especially offered not only practical help but company, loyalty, and a certain steady presence in lonely places. A cat in a house or store might keep vermin down while also claiming the warmest chair with perfect moral certainty. Even work animals could become familiar presences rather than mere tools. A horse's breath in the cool evening, the sound of it feeding calmly nearby, could reassure in ways difficult to explain to anyone who has only met transportation with cup holders. By lamplight these small wonders gather, a patched quilt warm over your knees, the sound of someone humming while mending, the smell of apples stewing, a page turning, a joke landing well, the sky outside clear with stars, a child asleep at last, a dog settling by the hearth, a well-worn cup of coffee held in both hands. None of it is grand. That is exactly the point. Life without electricity in the Wild West is full of friction, but also full of modest blessings that land with remarkable force because they are not diluted by abundance. So when you imagine the old frontier, it helps to remember not only the labour and the lack, but also these small recoveries of happiness, the pie cooling on the sill, the song in the next room, the clean collar, the neighbour calling in, the breeze through the open door, the stars beyond the porch. These are the things that make a hard life livable, not by erasing difficulty, but by giving it counterweight. And sometimes, in a world this demanding, counterweight is everything. Night has settled fully now, and the house seems to float in darkness rather than stand against it. The lamp burns low, the stove gives off its steady last warmth. Beyond the walls, the land lies open under the sky, and there is almost nothing to interrupt the stars. This is one of the strangest truths about living without electricity in the Wild West of 1870. The dark is not empty. It is immense. It feels like a real presence pressing softly against every window, every door, every thought that lingers too long before sleep. You sit with that darkness for a while, and in doing so you begin to sense why people of this time imagine the future so intensely. They already lived in an age of change. Railroads were pushing westward. Telegraph lines stitched distant places together in sharp bursts of coded meaning. New towns rose with astonishing speed and sometimes vanished almost as fast. Factories back east and in Europe were pouring out tools, fabrics, stoves, clocks, glass, and machines that reached even rough settlements by rail and wagon. Progress was not an abstract idea. It was visible, purchasable, discussable. It simply had not yet reached every room. That matters, in a world where a telegram can cross great distances quickly. But a family still reads by kerosene and hauls water by hand. The future feels both near and oddly incomplete. You can sense it coming, like weather over the plains. You may hear talk in town of newer lamps, improved stoves, better pumps, sewing machines, threshing machines, rail connections, town water systems, gaslighting in larger cities, or marvels demonstrated back east that sound almost improper. The 19th century loved invention, with a confidence that bordered on courtship. A sewing machine, for instance, could feel nearly miraculous in a household used to endless hand-stitching. A cast-iron cook stove with smarter design might save fuel and time. A windmill pumping water on a farm could spare countless trips with buckets. Improved agricultural tools could reshape a season's labour. None of these inventions abolish work, but they alter its weight. The frontier mind is practical enough to understand that even small mechanical help can change a life. Electricity itself remains mostly outside ordinary domestic life in 1870, except in specialised uses and the growing world of telegraphy and scientific demonstration. Scholars still debate how clearly average Western residents imagined electrical lighting in the home at this point, because knowledge spread unevenly and public understanding mixed real science with rumour, showmanship, and plain wishful thinking. Many people had heard of electric experiments and demonstrations. Far fewer had any reason to believe a plain cabin, ranch house, or boarding room might one day blaze with safe bright light at the touch of a switch. That idea would have sounded like luxury, lunacy, or both. And yet the seeds were there. The era was crowded with inventors, tinkerers, promoters, mechanics, and dreamers. Fairs and newspapers fed public appetite for novelty. Patent medicine men sold nonsense. Genuine inventors sold possibility. People read of new devices with a mix of skepticism and hunger. The frontier especially had reason to be interested in any invention that promised less labour, better communication, safer lighting, or more reliable power. The Old West was not anti-technology. It was simply waiting, bargaining with distance and supply. You can imagine a conversation in a Western town on a winter evening. Someone at the stove in a hotel lobby mentions telegraph progress, or a new machine seen in a paper. Another shrugs and says such wonders belong in eastern cities. A third insists the railroad will bring everything in time. A fourth points out, not unfairly, that what this town needs first is a decent road, fewer leaks, and a blacksmith who stops promising Friday then meaning next month. Human beings meet the future with hope, doubt, and practical annoyance all at once. Still, even modest improvements had begun to change expectations. Railroad time disciplined communities. Mail moved more regularly where lines had reached. Manufactured goods became easier to obtain in connected towns. Store windows displayed more variety. Household possessions multiplied slowly. The very idea of what a home might contain began expanding a generation earlier. Some items now thought desirable or ordinary would have seemed remote extravagances. By 1870, people were already learning to want more comfortable lives, not because they had grown weak, but because the market had taught them that comfort could perhaps be bought. The frontier therefore sits in a curious emotional place. It is rugged, yes, but not timeless. Too often later, stories trap it in a permanent sepia glow, as if it existed outside history, full of brave faces and eternal dust. In truth, Western people were moving through history at considerable speed. They were not ancestors frozen in quaint hardship. They were modern people by the standards of their own day, adapting constantly, curious about tools, aware of national events, and often eager for improvements that made labour more bearable. A quirky example of this appetite for novelty lies in public fascination with demonstrations. Mechanical devices, scientific lectures, travelling exhibits, and strange new products could attract real attention. People were not too busy surviving to be interested in innovation. On the contrary, survival made innovation attractive. A better lamp, a faster pump, a stronger plough, a sharper reaper, a quicker route, a cleaner stove. The frontier had no special romance with needless inconvenience. It endured hardship because it had to, not because it wished to preserve the aesthetic purity of suffering. At the same time, you sense something else in this darkness that later generations would lose. The old rhythms remain intimate. A house sleeps when the lamp goes out. A town dims almost all at once. Stars are not decorative. They are part of ordinary life. Bodies tire in honest alignment with the sun. The night preserves mystery because it cannot be fully conquered. Even as progress approaches, there is a certain vastness here that will shrink once wires stretch overhead and bright windows ignore the moon. This is not to say the coming future would be worse. It would save eyes, save labour, save time, and likely save a fair number of houses from badly managed lamps. Electric light would later reduce fire hazards from candles and kerosene in many settings, though new systems brought their own risks and costs. Pumps and engines would spare bodies. Refrigeration would transform food. Telephones would compress distance. Motors would rearrange town soundscapes entirely. The long human project of making life easier would keep advancing because people wanted it to, but from where you sit in 1870, those changes are only partly visible. The future glows at the edges of conversation, commerce, and rumour. It has not yet crossed the threshold and taken a seat at your table. So you remain with the current world, a world in which every bit of light burns something. Every gallon of water must come from somewhere specific. Every warm room depends on fuel and effort, and every evening accepts darkness as part of the terms of existence. You think about the children growing up in such places. Some will remember these nights all their lives. The smell of kerosene, the rough feel of homespun cloth, the stars over an unlit road, the cold basin in winter, the sound of horses shifting in the dark. Then, in middle age or old age, many of them would witness astonishing changes: brighter towns, electric streetlights, telephones, motors, indoor plumbing in more homes, radios later on. The memory of a childhood without electric light would become a measure of how much the world had moved under their feet. That shift was not uniform, of course. Cities changed sooner than farms. Wealthy households improved sooner than poor ones. Remote settlements waited longer. Historians still differ over how quickly Western domestic life modernized across class and region, because progress rarely marches in a neat line. It arrives in patches. One town gets a rail spur, another gets left behind. One family buys a machine, another keeps mending by hand. One hotel installs a modern system, a nearby ranch still relies on lanterns and muscle. History is lumpy that way, very inconsiderate of our desire for tidy timelines. Yet even uneven change reshapes imagination. Once people know something better exists, patience with the old way subtly weakens. A dim lamp is harder to admire when you have heard of brighter methods. Hauling water feels more backward once you have seen a pump save steps. A trip of several days seems less natural once a train crosses the distance faster. The frontier is often described as a place of hard acceptance, and it was. But it was also a place of wanting land, wanting security, wanting profit, wanting ease, wanting the children to have a better house than this one. In that sense, the dream of brighter years is not only about electricity, it is about relief. Relief from smoke blackening the ceiling, relief from endless carrying and chopping, relief from night-swallowing useful hours, relief from the cost of every extra candle burned, relief from the suspicion that one broken wheel, one bad winter, one illness, one failed crop could throw everything back into uncertainty. Progress promised steadier control over daily life. That promise was deeply seductive because daily life was where hardship actually lived. Still, for this 1 hour, none of the future has fully arrived. The room remains plain and immediate. The lamp throws gold across your knuckles. The stove breathes warmth against your legs. The boards smell faintly of old wood and ash. Somewhere outside an animal shifts, then stills. The silence that follows is broad enough to hear your own breathing in it. There is dignity in this life, even when it is tiring. There is intelligence in all the small habits that keep a household running. There is patience in the way people learn the moods of weather, fuel, animals, distance, and light. You also sense how much of human history has been lived this way, nearer to dark than to brightness, nearer to season than to switch. The Wild West is only one chapter in that much larger story. Across centuries and continents, people have gone to sleep by firelight, measured days by the sun, risen cold, hauled water, feared storms, and looked at the stars with the same mixture of humility and private thought. Electricity would not erase that ancestry. It would only interrupt its daily repetition. A final odd truth appears here. The future people dream of rarely arrives looking as simple as they hoped. Better tools bring new expenses. More connection brings more noise. Greater comfort brings new dependency. Every solution carries its own complications. Still, few on this frontier would truly choose to reject easier light, safer water, warmer rooms, or faster communication if offered honestly. Nostalgia is a luxury more available to descendants than to participants, so the night continues around you, and the dream of brighter years remains exactly that, a dream near enough to imagine, far enough to leave the lamp burning low beside you. The West of 1870 is still a place of muscle, flame, darkness, distance, and sky. It is also a place leaning toward change, listening for it in train whistles, reading about it in newspapers, discussing it in stores, and measuring it against immediate needs. The future has not conquered the room, but it has entered the mind. Now the hour grows softer. The work of the day has finally loosened. The lamp is lowered again, and the light turns gentle, barely touching the corners of the room. The stove hums in a quieter way, more ember than flame. Outside, the night air moves over the grass, the dust, the fences, the sleeping roofs, with a patience older than any railroad or wire. You feel the rough blanket waiting, the weight of tiredness settling kindly over the limbs, the eyes growing less interested in objects and more interested in rest. The world narrows to pleasant essentials, a little warmth on the hands, a little hush in the walls, a faint scent of smoke and cooled iron. The dark beyond the window is no longer something to resist. It is simply where the land goes when the day is done. Above it, the stars remain bright and calm, scattered in numbers no city would later allow. They seem close enough to listen to, if stars listened, which they never do, though people have spent ages asking them to. You breathe more slowly now. The room breathes with you. The house settles once, then becomes still, somewhere very far off. Perhaps a dog sounds once into the dark, or perhaps it is only the memory of a sound from earlier in the evening. It does not matter, nothing more is required of you tonight. No bucket, no broom, no road, no lamp to trim again. Only this quiet, this dimness, this long, soft descent from effort into sleep. So the old frontier fades as gently as the last glow in the stove. The hard edges blur, the chores release their hold. The roads disappear into the dark prairie, and the towns lie quiet under moon and star. each window slowly surrendering its light. The people inside their homes, cabins, bunkhouses, and boarding rooms drift toward dreams, carrying with them the smells of wood smoke, dry grass, leather, soap, dust, and bread. Their world is not easy, it is not bright, but it is deeply human, held together by habit, hope, and the small faithful comforts that have always carried people through the night. And now even those thoughts can grow softer. Let the wind stay outside. Let the stars keep watch without needing an answer. Let the last warmth fade at its own pace. The dark is wide, but it is no longer lonely. It is restful now, calm and deep, spreading over the prairie and the hills, over the barns and the telegraph poles, over the little houses where lamps have gone out one by one. You do not need to follow the future any farther tonight. It will come in its own time. For now there is only stillness, and the kind quiet of a world finally asleep,